I'm the NALC Vice Chair for Member Services, but for 30 years I was the Chief Officer of the Northumberland Association of Local Councils, and it's largely from the experience of local government reorganisation in Northumberland that I'm making this presentation today. Although I must say I have, from the sidelines, observed local government reorganisations around the country over a number of decades as well. I think so what I want to cover in this presentation is, first of all, providing a bit of context, history and geography of local government reorganisation, but then going on to look at the actual process that's involved, and then to focus in on one or two key elements of that process that I think are of particular interest and relevance to county associations of local councils and to our sector. And then to go on to some of the details about how I think county associations can make a positive impact on the reorganisation process and on the product that comes out of it. And I hope the message will come across that I think it makes sense to be proactive in this rather than just being a bystander waiting to see what comes out the end of the machine. But then I also want to say something about the creation of new local councils that certainly went on at the same time in Northumberland. And I know there's a lot of work going on in a number of counties around England that are facing up to local government reorganisation now about creating new local councils that may come into being either before the unitary authority or at the same time or possibly afterwards. And I'll go into some of the nuts and bolts of that. The aim of this presentation is just to provide everyone with a better understanding about local government reorganisation and what the opportunities are. Given that a number of other county areas have already been through the process as well, and some of the county officers and other leading people from those county associations are still available and around, it'll be nice to think that it should be possible to draw on their experiences as well. And within NALC, we're looking at the possibility of having space within the NALC website where we can store contributions and material, whether it's video presentations like this or whether it's various documentation or whatever, but making it available in the website for those county associations that could benefit from tapping into that. So let's start then with a bit of history. Well, those county areas that are now facing local government reorganisation, it's a big deal for you. It is. You are the last vestiges of the model of local government that was created in 1974. Back then, the government pretty much had a universal approach, which was to create a two-tier structure of principal authorities, counties and districts. And that was designed to be uniform all over the country, actually not only England, but Wales as well. There were slight differences between the so-called shire county areas and the metropolitan county areas, but nevertheless, it was a very simple model of county and districts. And the intention was that that new structure would last for many, many, many years to come. That was the intention anyway. What actually happened in practice was that within a number of years after 1974, adjustments started to be made. My recollection was that one of the first was in the Isle of Wight, where it was a nonsense that in order to have a two-tier model, they'd had to create two tiny districts underneath the Isle of Wight county. So those two districts were dissolved sometime after 1974. Then the government, after that, took the decision to remove some tiers of local government in some parts of the country. So the metropolitan county councils disappeared. The county councils that had been created for Avon, Humberside and Cleveland were wiped off the map. The Greater London Council went. But also there'd been a simmering discontent in a lot of the so-called shire cities that had lost their, what in effect had been a unitary county borough status. They'd lost that in 74. They were given unitary status again in the 1990s. But it was really only after that that the government started looking at the possibility of reorganisation to form unitary authorities in most of the shire areas. Started in a small way in the 1990s. A few were created, Herefordshire, Rutland. But in Berkshire, unitaries were created by doing away with the Berkshire County Council. And then it was in 2009 that the government really embarked on what I think was a more competitive process, inviting principal authorities either to work together or to fight against each other, to put forward proposals for what unitary local government might look like in some shire areas. And although a larger number of areas did put forward proposals, the ones that went ahead with a reorganisation in 2009, there were 6 of them: Cornwall, Wiltshire, Shropshire, Cheshire, County Durham and Northumberland. And Northumberland was where I was the chief officer of the county association. Crucially, I think, in all but one case, the government's preferred solution was to create a single unitary covering the whole of the county area. The one exception was Cheshire. So in all of the others, Cornwall, Shropshire, etc., it was a single unitary for the Shire area, probably much to the annoyance of the district councils in each instance, who have been putting forward proposals for a more diverse approach, if I could put it that way. It does have some significance whether a county area ends up as a single unitary or as several unitaries. It's arguably less complicated if you don't have to break up massive services like education and adult social care and children's social services and so on. That's quite a difference. So 2009 was a significant change in a number of counties. And then on a more piecemeal basis since then, since 2009, there have been reorganisation in Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Dorset, Northants, Somerset, North Yorkshire and Cumbria. So actually, I don't know what the populations add up to, but it means that probably most of England has already moved over to unitary local government. And I think there are 21 possible areas left, county areas that are facing up to local government reorganisation now. You could flippantly look at it as just rounding off a process that's been going on for a number of years, no big deal, but actually it'll be a very big deal in those particular areas, no doubt about it. And I think the question for county associations is really in those areas, do you want to be just bystanders waiting to see what happens, or do you want to be in there helping to shape things and be part of the process. So that's the, if you like, that's the historical and the geographical context. And as you know, the government's wish to go ahead at this stage with reorganisation in those final 21 or thereabouts places is also linked with the proposals that are in the white paper, now the devolution bill, to create mayoral strategic authorities. So the creation of unitary authorities in places that haven't got them at the moment is partly also to do with, if you like, creating organisational space for these new mayoral strategic authorities. And I think it's worthwhile noting as well that I think part of the motivation is around making economies, i.e. money saving eventually by doing away with one tier of principal authorities, although the savings aren't always as great as people might claim when they're putting forward their proposals. So that's the background, the context. What about the process itself? Well, if you haven't done so already, I suggest you get access to a very useful briefing document that was produced by the government in July of last year, July 2025. It's available on their website, and I think we in NALC have circulated the details several times. It's a very well laid out description of the various stages of the process, starting from the invitation that went out from the Secretary of State to those areas, inviting the principal authorities, encouraging them to try to work together to come up with their proposals, but recognizing that in some instances there would be competing proposals. So inviting proposals, then those proposals being submitted jointly by district and county councils, the government then going through a process, a statutory consultation process, and many of the county associations affected will have been consulted. Well, actually, I hope all of them will have been consulted, and you will have decided whether and how to respond to that. I recall from my experience in Northumberland back in the lead up to the 2009 reorganisation, we found it a bit difficult to be a bit too conclusive one way or the other, because we knew we had members in our association who were great fans of either the county or the districts, and we probably were not going to reach a consensus over any particular model. And anyway, at the end of the day, it's the government and their advisors who take the decision, you know, whatever statutory consultees have to say. So the government then announces its verdict, what model of unitary authority or authorities it wants for a particular area. But that's not the end of the process, because then the government have to introduce the legislation to help make it happen. And that is, in each case, a separate statutory instrument called a structural change order. And from past experience, each area, so back in 2009, there was a Cornwall structural change order, there was a Northumberland one, and so on. And that's what will happen with this latest round of reorganisations. Halfway through January of this year, 2026, the draft structural changes order for Surrey has been laid before Parliament. It actually takes some time to go through the parliamentary process, so these things don't happen in just a matter of days or weeks. They take longer than that. Once the order's been made, then structures can be put in place to begin what's known as the transition period. And the transition period is a hugely crucial one where the new authority or the new authorities are designed and populated, new systems are put in place so that on their vesting day, the 1st of April of whether that's 2027 or 2028 or later, that all of the main building blocks will then have been put in place so that each of the new authorities could be firing on all cylinders by that point. And then after that, obviously, each new local unitary authority gets on with its business. But I think it's worth stressing that not everything is sorted out and sewn up by day one. And there's a lot of work goes on, a lot of adjustments, a lot of reconciliations and so on that go on, not only in the ensuing year, but for some years to come after that. And I'll say a bit more about that, about the Northumberland experience later. But I want to go back now to the structural changes order and the transition period and what that actually means and the significance for county associations of local councils and for parish and town councils in our sector. So in the legislation, the wording in each structural changes order is very similar, and it refers to preparing for and facilitating the economic, effective, efficient, and timely transfer to the new authority of the functions, property, rights, and liabilities of the predecessor councils. As a result of that, it could sound very much like just a technical process of changing one lot of constituent organisations into one or several new organisations. But there's a heck of a lot of work, a heck of a lot of emotions, a heck of a lot of strain, aspirations, and so on behind all of that as well. And one would hope that in each instance, the aspirations are to create something that people want to be proud of and that do a good job once they're created, that it's not just a technical exercise of slotting people in and coming up with a new budget and so on, that actually what comes out at the far end is something that's actually good, something that people can be enthusiastic about, and seizing opportunities that perhaps just weren't there under the old model of two tiers of principal authorities. Structural changes orders also have this proviso in that the reorganisation process must have regard to the approved unitary authority submission. Interesting that, have regard to, not necessarily slavishly follow, but it does mean that the proposals that were put forward that went to the Secretary of State should guide, but not actually straitjacket the unitary authority that comes. There has to be a decision-making process and a decision-making structure during the transition period. And as with local government in general, that consists of two bits, if you like, the councillors bit and the staff bit. Now, there's a difference here on the governance side, depending on whether a county area is going to be reorganised into a single unitary or whether it's going to be reorganised into two or more unitaries. Where it's being reorganised into a single unitary, in effect, the governance can be built upon and by amending the executive arrangement of the existing county council. Now that does not mean that the existing county council is therefore in the driving seat and can pick up all the best jobs and organise everything to suit the county council, because there are inbuilt checks and balances and mechanisms to ensure that there's a fair playing field, if you like. But technically, something called an implementation executive can be set up under the auspices of the existing executive, but involving people from the existing district councils in there as the governance arrangement. However, in a county area that is going to be reorganised into 2 or more unitary authorities, then joint committee arrangements have to be set up, and each new unitary authority area will need its own joint committee. So for counties like Surrey, where we know that the preferred solution is it 2 or 3 unitary authorities, there'll be 2 or 3 joint committees, and so on. And for each reorganisation area, an implementation plan needs to be produced. But also for each county area that's facing up to reorganisation, each county area will have a single implementation team. That means that even where more than one unitary authority is going to be created, there'll be a single implementation team, which makes sense, I think, in order to ensure coordination, fair play, appropriate mechanisms for staff recruitment, appropriate mechanisms for dividing up assets or debts, and so on. And I think one of the good bits of news there is that if you're a county association with a very, very small staff complement, and let's face it, most county associations only have 1, 2, or 3 members of staff, and you're thinking, how on earth can we stretch our resources around having to engage with several different unitary authority transitional arrangements? The good news is that there should just be a single implementation team, therefore just the one team to, well, hopefully to try and get a seat on, but I'll come back to that in a little while. One of the huge challenges for the transition process is to, I was going to say, sort the wheat for the chaff. That's not a very good analogy, really, but it's to distinguish between all of the things, all of the tasks, all of the decisions, all of the things that need to happen in the lead up to the vesting day, the day when the new unitary authority actually comes into effect. What are the things that have to be done by then? What are the things that maybe don't have to be done, but really are highly desirable, and where it would ensure that a new unitary authority got off to a better start if things were put in place by day one? Then what are the things that are perhaps less urgent, but will need to be sorted out during that first year of the new authority? And what perhaps are the things that can be deferred, that need to be grasped sooner or later, but are less urgent? And even though the work might start on addressing them in the life of the new unitary authority, they might not actually reach fruition until perhaps year 2 or year 3 or later. Now, I don't have a complete and comprehensive picture of what all of the imperatives are, but they're obviously things like not only settling on the management and departmental structure of a new unitary, but then actually populating it. So that's around staff recruitment, redeployments, redundancies, all of that sort of thing, transfers, a big job to be done there. On the governance side, there's settling on a new governance structure, committees, the executive or cabinet, scrutiny, um, a council's constitution, delegation arrangements, procedures, safeguards, modus operandi, all of that kind of thing. All of that has to be sorted out in advance of the new unitary authority actually starting. Then there's the financial stuff, budgeting, and that's not a one-off process. It might start off by trying to simply link together the budgets of the predecessor authorities, but it has to be an iterative process because it's only when you start to reorganize and start to make commitments that you have to make adjustments, crucially as well, until you know for certain what the government is definitely going to give you by way of grants, revenue support grants, and all of the rest of it. You can't be totally confident, totally certain that the expenditure items on the budget that you've been working on are actually going to be affordable. So there's an iterative process there. Plus, of course, having to integrate financial systems from the predecessor authorities. And crucially, before you get to the first day of the new unitary authority coming into being, you need to set the council tax. So that they are all absolute imperatives. Also, integration of databases, sussing out, trying to get a better feel for what have we actually inherited or what are we inheriting as a new unitary authority, property portfolios. And it was certainly the case with the reorganisation in 2009 in Northumberland that a lot of the databases that the new unitary authority inherited from its predecessors, some of them were good quality and detailed, some of them were somewhat less. I wouldn't say there's anything unreliable in there, but some of them had gaps and were not well presented, and it was a bit of a headache trying to integrate all of that. And even if people start off the transition process with a implementation plan where they think they've dotted all the I's and crossed the T's, you can be pretty sure that as that process goes along, all sorts of new glitches will come to light, new risks will be thought of, new issues will need to be addressed before the day one. Now, I'm saying all of this because I know there's been a lot of discussion at county officer forums, at the fortnightly meetings that county officers have with NALC officers and at various National Assembly meetings and so on. A lot of speculation about, the parish and town council interests and how they fit into all of this. Well, and about devolution, about our sector taking on new things, whether they want them or not, asset transfers and so on. I think you need to bear in mind that a lot of those issues are things that will be perceived by the implementation team as not as important as sorting out the staffing, sorting out the finances and all the rest of it for the new unitary authorities. Now, I don't know whether it was that we were successful or whether we were just lucky, but in Northumberland, there was a ready recognition at a very early stage of the reorganisation process that the implementation team and the implementation executive wanted to have our county association on board, wanted to ensure that, I think there was a strong recognition that if you're going to create a unitary authority covering, in our instance, 2,000 square miles, a very big area, um, with elected members spread quite thinly as well. There would be a huge dependence on the parish and town councils, not only to be the deliverers of local services, but to be the eyes and ears on the ground on behalf of the new unitary authority, and to potentially be be the mechanism to help support the work of the new unitary authority as well. So rather than it being any kind of afterthought, our interests were taken on board at a very early stage in the reorganisation process. And I didn't have to bang on a closed door. I was invited to be a member of the joint implementation team in Northumberland in the lead up to the creation of the new unitary authority. I was given my own workspace in the team's office, uh, my own email account, IT equipment, and I was counted as a full member of the joint implementation team. And my remit was to ensure, really, that that the interests of the parish and town council sector were properly embraced by the new unitary authority, that there would be a decent working relationship there, that there would be clarity of roles, the distinction between what parish and town council should normally take a lead on and what the unitary authority would take a lead on, and that there would be a process and a structure in place as well to manage and evolve the relationship as time went on as well. Um, I think it's fair to say as well that it was probably recognised that because I'd been in the job for quite a long time, I had a fair knowledge of most parts of the county area. I knew the local communities. I understood some of the quirks around why some district councils had been doing some things in some ways and other districts did things in other ways, and so on as well. So it was actually a very exciting time to be involved in helping to shape the creation of a new unitary authority. Um, so it was good that the architects of the new unitary authority recognised the importance of having uh, a proper relationship with our sector, and also, incidentally, with the voluntary and community sector as well within Northumberland. And I played a part in all of that. Um, I suppose I was wearing two hats. It was the case in previous decades. It's not so commonplace nowadays, but in days gone by, it was quite usual for the chief officer of the county association also to be the chief officer of what used to be called rural community councils. And I suppose I was wearing two hats in coming into the joint implementation team. One was on behalf of parish and town councils, and one was on behalf of voluntary organisations, the voluntary sector. But I suppose one of the key things that I worked on behalf of parish and town councils was on the creation of the Northumberland Charter for Local Councils. Now, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the idea of charters. Back in 2009, it wasn't a totally new idea either. I know that NALC, way back when, had done some work with the Association of District Councils on a model charter. And it just seemed in Northumberland that it made sense to work on the production of something that would be tailor-made for our area, taking account of the varying capacities and aspirations of different parish and town councils across Northumberland. Also, actually taking account of the fact that 8 new largest councils, parish councils, were going to be created in the southeast of the county in an area where there had just not been any parishes before. But I'll come on to that in a little while as well. So, Northumberland Charter for Local Councils. Fairly early on, even before the implementation team was set up, we as a county association undertook a questionnaire survey of all of our parish and town councils, of which there were 140 something, really to gauge where they were at in terms of what they were doing now, but also whether they were up for taking on a bigger role in any way in the future, whether they had the capacity to do so, and so on. And not surprisingly, that revealed a diversity of situations. Some were already doing a lot, but felt they couldn't do any more. Others were already doing a lot, but had aspirations to do more and were, up for anything that might be presented to them. And there are others that were really just kind of ticking over, but were, I suppose, satisfying what their local communities expected of them. So we knew that there was that diversity of aspiration and of capacity. But I led the work on producing the charter, and that involved over the course of time during the transition period, not only an iterative process with our membership, but an iterative process with the governance arrangements within the emerging unitary authority. Bearing in mind this was all some months before the unitary authority officially came into being. But also, as senior staffing for the new unitary authority was put into place in the months leading up to the vesting day, I was able to have conversations with relevant heads of service on provisions that were going to go into the charter on a variety of topics. And that charter covers the sorts of things which I'm sure most charters that you come across around the country try to cover in terms of consultation, service delivery, which tiers responsible for what, opportunities for partnership arrangement, opportunities for devolution, opportunities for asset transfers, plus some of the financial arrangements as well. To cut a long story short, in January, January 2009, a couple of months before the new unitary authority came into being, our county association executive committee adopted the Northumberland Charter. We were then able to confirm to the emerging unitary authority that we were committed to it. That then gave the emerging unitary authority the confidence at their first meeting on the afternoon of the 1st of April 2009, in a very packed agenda for the new unitary authority that had to adopt a constitution and heaven knows what else, all sorts of other things. One of the agenda items was to adopt officially the Northumberland Charter for Local Councils. So that's actually quite an achievement. And I would encourage all county associations that are facing up to local government reorganisation now to see whether you can negotiate to get a charter in place so that when your new unitary authority or authorities have their first meeting, that they will adopt, amongst all their other policies, a charter that sets out the relationship between the unitary authority and our sector. A good challenge for you all to be working on there. I think if possible, I still do have electronically that original 2009 version of the Northumberland Charter. And if possible, if we can create the opportunity within the National NALC website for material like that. We'll post it on there, and then the rest of you can just crib it or reject it or do what you want with it anyway. I think, but it set the right tone and it set things going in the right way. So this wasn't something that we had to wait for the new unitary authority to get up and running and they would get round to looking at once they'd got their feet under the table. It was a set of commitments that were there from the first day. So I'll come back to some of the implementation issues about that in a little while. But what I want to talk about now is about our work that was involved with helping to create 8 new parish level councils within Northumberland, which was a process that actually went on in parallel with the local government reorganisation process. And it was only in 2 districts. There were 6 districts or boroughs in Northumberland. 4 of them were already totally parished. 2 of them had no parishes in them at all. And I think that they were the ex-mining, ex-industrial areas of the southeast of the county. And they were areas where historically our attempts to persuade them to carry out parish reviews, community governance reviews in previous decades had just met with resistance. They just didn't want to know. However, once it became clear that local government reorganisation was going to create a single county-wide unitary authority, both the senior staff and crucially the political leadership in those districts realised that their areas, their communities, and let's face it, their politicians as well, were actually going to lose out if their areas were not parished. So suddenly, both those 2 districts pulled out all the stops to undertake reviews with the objective of creating new parish, well, in most instances, those parishes then became town councils. And they beat a path to our door, to the door of the County Association for help. And I was more than happy to help with that. It did mean loads of public meetings and engagement with those 2 district councils. But actually, the whole process, review process, leading to the creation of new parish and town councils was not difficult, was not particularly resource intensive. It was pretty straightforward. So I think for any of you county associations, if you are meeting any resistance or apathy or anything from any of your district councils who really don't want to go ahead with a community governance review, don't want to see about creation of new parish councils in areas that are currently unparished. I think if you can draw on experiences from elsewhere in the country to show how relatively straightforward the process is, then I think that's well worth doing. I won't go into some of the legal technicalities, but in one of the districts, the review process had actually started under some previous legislation and therefore had to follow the 1997 Act. But the other district was a bit slower off the mark, but was then able to undertake a review process under, must have been a 2007 Act, I think, which was actually a simplified process. But anyway, the result was the same. It meant that on the same day, 1st of April 2009, the same day that the new unitary authority was created, 8 new parish level councils were created. And because I and the Northumberland Association had been part of the whole process, helping them to come into being, we found ourselves in the driving seat for supporting those new parish councils for the first umpteen months of their existence. So what did that involve? Well, in the lead up to the creation of the new parish councils, the reviewing authorities, i.e. the district councils, had to decide on a precept for each of those new parish councils for their first year. So we were consulted over that and we provided some guidance. They were modest precepts, but actually new parish councils in their first year of existence don't actually incur an enormous amount of expenditure anyway. We actually stole a march on the unitary authority in that the unitary authority's first meeting was in the afternoon of the 1st of April. But in the morning of the 1st of April, we organised 8 consecutive meetings for the new parish councils, for each one in turn, and steered them through undertaking a number of enabling decisions, which enabled the new councils to get up and running. And with sufficient provisions in place to make sure that they could be adequately supported and trained and helped to eventually sort of put their staffing in place and so on. I think I must be a squirrel because another of the documents that I've still got is the outline agenda for each of those 8 initial meetings and the decisions that had to be taken. But basically, see, at this stage, those parish councils came into being, but they didn't have their own elected members. They just had interim governance arrangements whereby the relevant members of the new unitary authority for a particular parish area were the interim governance for each parish council. That meant that some of the more populated parish areas maybe had 4 or 5 unitary authority members in that role, but some only had 2 unitary authority members. But in effect, all they had to do was just take the enabling decisions to enable myself and our organisation and a temporary part-time member of staff that we recruited for the process, took some just basic enabling decisions so that we could actually get on with helping to create the new parish councils. The elections for those new parish councils didn't take place until I think it was late May. And then, of course, it takes time. You've got to provide induction and training for the new councillors and then let them take decisions about how they wanted to go about a staff recruitment process. But we helped them with the staff recruitment process and so on as well. And we pretty much made sure that they all agreed to join the Northumberland and the National Association of Local Councils from day one, and a few other crucial decisions as well. But by the time each of those new parish councils got their first members of proper staff in place, their clerks, that would have been September, October, November. So we had been providing hand-holding for about 6 to 8 months or something like that. But it was a crucial period, and I think it set the right tone for making sure those councils could be as effective as reasonably possible in their first year of operation. I think it's, oh yes, one of the things that's worth mentioning there is that one of the decisions that had to be taken, it became apparent that a newly created parish council from day one, it might not have many assets or responsibilities, but actually it becomes the sole allotments authority. And there's no way that a brand new parish council, even before it's got its own dedicated staffing in place, can start managing allotments. So one of the decisions that had to be taken was to ask the new unitary authority, in effect, to manage each parish's allotments for the first year, while each respective parish council built up its own organisational capacity. That was just one of the quirky things. There were all sorts of odds and ends that had to be addressed. Some of them could be addressed in the lead up to the creation of the unitary authority and the new parish councils. Some of them happened in the months after that. One of the things that I recall was sorting out new civic commitments, responsibilities, and so on. A lot of civic duties, mayoral type duties, had been done by the districts prior to reorganisation. There was no way that the new unitary authority had the capacity to carry on with all of those. So we arranged for the parishes to take over many of them, and also to arbitrate over conflicts where more than one parish council wanted to get its hand on civic regalia that was coming down the line. I think in the longer term, most town councils then created their own civic regalia, but in some instances, there were mini disputes anyway when more than one council wanted to get its hand on the same regalia at the same time for some function or other. There was a big job to be done in terms of sorting out representation on outside bodies as well. The constituent districts coming together into the new unitary authority had been represented on all manner of other public and voluntary sector type bodies, and there was no way that those responsibilities could be handled by the new unitary authority councillors. So that was another loose end that had to be sorted out, including membership of the National Park Authority. Suddenly, the parish and town council sector had a whole lot of extra places to that it could call its own on the National Park Authority, ones that had been occupied by district council representatives in the past. There was a whole lot of urgent decisions had to be taken about making sure that arrangements were in place for things like holiday play schemes, music festivals, and then eventually Remembrance Sunday events as well, things where in the past the districts would have been hugely involved in things like that. All sorts of quirky things to sort out or clarify in relation to the relationship to the ownership of property. All sorts of stuff on streets, not only on streets but elsewhere, had built up over the decades. Sometimes where in the past the old Manpower Services Commission job creation teams had built bus shelters or decorative planters and stuff like that, where district councils had worked with parish councils to get grants to put in children's play areas, but without any clarity about who was responsible for them or who owned them or whatever else. You know, all sorts of loose ends like that that needed sorting out. Clarifying things like policies for bin emptying in community premises, what parish council property could expect by way of free bin emptying, village halls as well. Trying to reconcile dog control orders, including along Northumberland's beaches, where 5 of the 6 districts each had a bit of Northumberland's beach. If you see, I haven't put that across very clearly. Yeah, there were 5 district areas, each with their own policies regarding dog control and things like that on beaches, and trying to get a sensible, harmonious policy out of that. Various licensing arrangements that needed harmonising. I suppose it's worth stressing that in the shorter term, the aim, the important thing for the new unitary authority is around harmonising and getting a consistency of approach across areas that had previously been run by different district councils. And that's probably a more important priority than devolution to parish councils as such. But the harmonisation and getting a consistent approach does, in its own right, lead to a certain amount of handing things over to parish and district councils. I think that's actually quite inevitable, but it's not done out of any sense of saying, "Oh yeah, we want to dump this because we don't want it anymore." It's about trying to get in a sense, a level playing field in relation to a lot of traditional parish level services like, amenities like bus shelters and seats, also things like, who runs the parks and so on. We tried also to get some kind of distinction and a policy in place about who should be responsible for public toilets in future, and trying to distinguish between strategic toilets and local toilets. Strategic toilets being ones that were mostly there for the tourist industry and therefore part of the regional or county-wide economy, and which ones were serving only just a sort of neighbourhood interest. We didn't get anywhere with that. I've almost come to the end of my presentation, but just a few other points to make. One is that we recognise that even though we'd got the charter in place from day one, implementation could not possibly all happen in a big bang from day one. So some things, while some things needed to get sorted out during the first year of the unitary authority, others could safely be held over to year two to enable the new parish councils in particular to build up their organisational capacity. Some things went over to year three. Then in one instance, and not something actually involving parish responsibilities as such, but it's to do with the harmonisation of policies and practices. And that was around the new unitary authority knowing that it wanted and needed to have a new county-wide local plan. It inherited 6 very disparate district-level local plans, some with very detailed saved policies in, some without detailed saved policies in. Most of those district plans dated from about 2007 or something like that. We eventually ended up, after umpteen council elections over the years had produced different administrations of different political complexions, we ended up finally with a unified county-wide local plan in 2023. 16 years after some of the detailed policies of some of the original district plans were taken out and were no longer deemed to be viable. 16 years to eventually to harmonise something. I just hope that in your areas, in your counties, you don't have to wait 16 years to harmonise some of the crucial policies and procedures that are going to be inherited by your unitary authorities.